足痛くないの？
痛い。でも痛いの嫌いじゃないし。
何それ、なんかエロい。
変態。
This is the most human line of dialogue I have seen in anime. The instant I first watched this episode and read this subtitle, I was amazed at how true to life it felt. Beyond "that's hot" being an incredibly common phrase amongst me and those I interacted with in high school, and being a line I had never seen another show use in this casual, joking, but somewhat suggestive manner, there is the context within which it is delivered. Kumiko notes that hiking up a mountain carrying an instrument while in heels must hurt, and Reina replies, "It does hurt, but I don't hate pain." Now that line is comparatively rather anime-ish. A bit of badassery and a bit of edge mixed together and are a reasonable fit for a raven-haired loner Reina. Kumiko's reply here totally undercuts and grounds that line, though. It's the kind of cliched line that I've said in those same high school interactions, putting on that cool, edgy character in a somewhat facetious manner. The reply, "that's hot," gives us that necessary self-awareness to turn Reina from an anime character into a person simply playing that character. Kumiko recognizes what Reina is doing there and plays into it in this joking manner. It's basically a way more subtle and effective version of the "this is like something out of an anime" line that I've been seeing a bit more often recently, where by showing an awareness of the existence of its medium and that medium's trope, a work tries to feel more true to life. The key takeaway isn't that Reina doesn't mind pain, it's that Reina is the type of person who would bust out this endearingly adolescent but not totally unserious line, and Kumiko's playful reply here drives that home. This extra layer to what the characters in Hibike do and say is something that comes up again and again when watching the series. Hibike Euphonium is special. It's one of those special works of art where I can sit back in my chair as I consume it, and be instilled with a deep sense of awe. A large part of that awe, when I'm not experiencing the sensory ecstasy that accompanies most of its performance scenes, is in response to how naturalistic its characters are, in every sense of the word. Ultimately, I think it is works of fiction that speak to the reality around us that tend to affect me most deeply. In my younger years, I was totally and utterly obsessed with Evangelion for months after watching it, due in large part to how illuminatingly its characters and ideas explored the ways in which we think, specifically the ways in which we think about our own self-worth and our place in the world. Another favorite, Serial Experiments Lain, offers commentary upon human connection, and the effect that both society and technology have upon those connections, along with where the line between those two begins to blur, and how that blurring of the two in turn also serves to further shape those connections. The aftermath of both of these series left me in a depressive state, the void as it's often referred to, and a piece of that state was an intense desire to create, to in some capacity do for others what these anime had done for me. Having started a YouTube channel recently, acquiring a creative outlet, that general underlying desire to be creating things had been sated fairly well. Until Hibike Euphonium's second season, that is, where it has been building steadily until reaching a point of no return as it has gone on. What then is the reality that Hibike speaks to in order to affect me so greatly? I mentioned the naturalism of its characters, and yet Eva has fantastic characters as well, along with all of that thematic commentary. Evangelion's characters are so good because of how well established their personalities and past significant experiences are. With the actions people take resulting from their basic personal tendencies combined with the experiences they've had, this great setup of its cast in Evangelion makes the actions of its characters make sense. They all have a logical basis that we can observe for ourselves, and that serves to make them believable. By throwing these internally consistent characters into the insane, incredibly stressful apocalyptic situation that Evangelion's world forces them to face, it really brings out those aspects of human psychology, the ideas of self-worth that I mentioned, that are under the surface, shaping our lives and experiences, but that are usually too subtle to be noticeable. Evangelion's setting draws that out of its characters, and allows us to explore these ideas in depth. As a result of this exaggeration, though, while the problems they face are of the kind that we face in our own lives, they face them to a degree that very few of us ever will. What Hibike does that is so remarkable is place those naturalistic, internally consistent, and multifaceted characters into a naturalistic setting. This isn't to detract from Evangelion's approach. I don't find Hibike's inherently better in some way, and as I outlined, the benefits of the way Evangelion goes about doing things are immense. That said, there is a resulting distinctiveness to the way that Hibike plays out as a result of this marriage of naturalistic characters and naturalistic setting that is utterly captivating. All of those facets of psychology that underlie everyone's day-to-day interactions, those elements that Evangelion draws out with its setting, are present in Hibike, and yet they are incredibly subtle, often only detectable through hints and implications. Every different interaction of theirs is from a slightly different angle, letting us see a new piece of their true selves peeking out from behind the armor they attempt to put up to hide them. And over the course of the series, those little glimpses serve as puzzle pieces with which we must attempt to construct an idea of who they truly are. By and large, we don't understand Hibike's characters, not fully. We don't understand the characters because they either don't understand themselves or don't want to be understood. Or more accurately, they generally aren't comfortable with someone fully understanding them. Sometimes both. Just like real people, they put up facades, and not theatrically over-the-top performances like Subaru hiding his mental breakdown behind a mask of quirky goofiness, but subtle, nuanced deceptions. They'll reveal their thoughts and how they're feeling, but with slight deviations, little edits of the truth. Some complaints are left unspoken, some grievances unaired, and that creates an underlying sense of tension that permeates all of these characters' interactions. Just as we must always question the double meaning behind much of what is being said, search for the truth that is being obfuscated by their words, each character must make these same considerations whenever they are involved in these conversations. And the fact that they by and large are shown to be doing just that is what makes them stand out so much amongst a sea of anime whose characters simply take what they're told at face value. This tendency towards deception and subsequent questioning extends to themselves as well, and we can see that from the opening scene of the series. In response to the announcement of which middle schools will be moving on in the competition, and her school not being one of them, Kumiko says, "We got dud gold, but it's still gold." And when Reina expresses intense frustration and asks, "Weren't we shooting for nationals?" Kumiko's response is, "Did you really think we could make it to nationals?" We will come to learn over the course of Season 1 that Kumiko's statements here don't seem to reflect her actual attitudes, and that it is instead more likely that she was attempting to rationalize their shortcomings in order to better cope with them, with the discovery of that indeed being the case coming in one of the series' most iconic scenes, in the penultimate episode of its first season. After being told that she will not get to play a beautiful but challenging passage from their performance piece, Kumiko is walking home, and begins repeating the mantra, "I want to improve," to herself, over and over again, that idea taking greater and greater hold of her as she begins running and tears start flowing freely. This reveals her underlying discontentment with settling, with just being good enough. She then admits that she wants to be better than everyone, and it culminates in her discovering the emotion underlying all of these frustrations. Echoing Reina's words after the announcement of the results all the way back in that first scene of the series, she says, "I'm so upset." Beyond everything else that is going on in Season 1, and there is a good deal of it, the story of our protagonist Kumiko centers around her discovering and breaking free from this lie that she had been telling herself. And after clearing that developmental hurdle in episode 12, we get to move on to the final episode, with what is now an immensely cathartic competition performance. This struggle does not merely play itself out in these two scenes, though. It manifests itself throughout the series in everyday conversation. Kumiko's tendency to make blunt observations aloud and then instantly apologize or seek to downplay them is not a shallow moe character quirk, as effective and adorable as it is in that capacity. It is a reflection of that dichotomy that she struggles with, of wanting to remain detached and indifferent, but of caring about these things deep down. It's a trait she carries with her into Season 2, but her increasing proactivity in seeking to involve herself in and help to resolve these various conflicts is right in line with her move towards accepting the fact that she does actually care. In episode 10 of the second season, all of those tendencies of Kumiko's and all of that tension and suspicion of others' true intentions comes to a dramatic head, when Kumiko confronts Asuka. This scene is in the vein of something rather common to anime, two characters having an argument about their ideals. It's honestly one of the more distinctive elements of the medium, with tons of climactic fights in shonen series containing them, and being about the battle between these sets of ideals more than the fight between the two combatants themselves. This may be the greatest such scene in the medium, however, and it all comes back to that naturalism. Asuka is a senior and scored in the top 30 in the nation on the mock exam. Kumiko is a first year with mediocre academics. Asuka doesn't even need to be right necessarily, she can just run rhetorical circles around Kumiko. It was honestly mind-blowing to see Kumiko not being overpowered philosophically, but intellectually. She just couldn't keep up. As the directing demonstrated to us, Asuka had her completely trapped. Just as we do, Asuka knows of Kumiko's hesitance to involve herself too deeply in conflicts, in spite of her desire to help, and she uses that to criticize the foolhardiness of Kumiko's assertion that everyone in the band wants Asuka back. She is the adult, arguing with cynicism and selflessness, while Kumiko is still a naive child. It is with that childishness that Kumiko eventually turns the tides, however, As her older sister had come to realize, this conception of maturity, of adulthood, is itself naive, especially when, like it or not, you are still a child yourself. How foolish do you have to be to assume that being a cynic makes you a realist? That you can know others' true desires fully enough for your own actions to be truly selfless? What Asuka does is push Kumiko to finally lower her barriers, and make these arguments. To admit her own childishness, to finally put a stake in the conflict. To reveal that right now she's going to be selfish, because she wants to play with Asuka. This is ultimately how she wins the argument, by being the person to finally be honest about themselves. Both she and Asuka had been putting up those facades, but she was brave enough to let it drop. At the end of this scene, we see this demonstrated when Kumiko asks, "Senpai, can I see your face?" And Asuka replies with, "No, your family will be cursed until the end of time." Kumiko casts that facade aside. Asuka will not, and that's why she will not win. I believe this also demonstrates another significant strength of Hibike's cast, which is the multiple facets that many of them have. Even in anime that have the character depth for characters to be hiding their true selves, those facades will often be just one layer deep. We get a climactic scene where they break down and admit that actually it was all an act they were putting on in order to hide X personality trait that they proceed to exposit to us. Just as we see small pieces of these characters through the small gaps in their armor, little chinks get made in that armor over the course of the series. Take Asuka, who I think is the best demonstration of this. Over the course of Season 2, she went from seeming selfless to selfish to selfless once more, and all of that was down to our perspective. When she talks with Kumiko during their training camp, she advises her not to share what she told her about Nozomi. Willing to take the fall and have Kumiko say that Asuka wouldn't talk about it, with her reasons for keeping Nozomi out of the band continuing to seem like a mere petty personal conflict, and Asuka accepting that burden. Hell, if you too had initially believed this hostility towards Nozomi to spring from a personal issue with her, then she will have gone from selfish to selfless to selfish to selfless by the end. And not due to erraticism on the part of her character, but merely through these shifts in perspective. That level of dynamism to the perspectives we get on her character is incredible. How could this sacrifice of her reputation in service of the band possibly be selfish, though? As we learn with a future conversation between Asuka and Kumiko, Asuka is so hell-bent on making it to nationals because she wants to be able to show off her playing to her estranged father, who will be one of the judges. Harsh tactics that she had employed, things like excluding Nozomi from the joy of participating in order to help the band succeed, or ignoring Natsuki back in Season 1 because she was a lost cause, were resorted to because she needed to make it to nationals, for her own sake. Ultimately, all of that is shown to be a lie, though. A villainous facade Asuka created in order to make Kumiko and maybe herself believe that she deserved this, that it was only right for her not to be able to compete, and in so doing to lessen the sting of her not going to be able to go to the nationals with them. Because the entire basis of that dramatic argument was Asuka's decision to leave the band, selflessly sacrificing that chance at nationals for what she perceived to be their greater good. Now, not every background character in the series can get this level of development that Asuka receives, obviously, but another striking aspect of the series is how knowledgeable about people those behind it seem to be. Band people specifically in the case of Hibike. As someone who was in band for all 4 years of high school myself, it was an absolute joy to see my band teacher's words come to fruition. You tend to get specific kinds of people always playing the same instruments. The second we see that the percussion section forgot a key mallet behind after leaving for a competition, they all became living humans in my eyes, no further development required. They are exactly the kind of unorganized blockheads that were the butt of so many jokes among my bandmates over those 4 years. In response to any potential replies here that you can't call a character who gets no development well realized just because you knew someone like them, I must point out that many people in our own lives don't get much development. All of the background characters in real life aren't people we'll understand on any particularly meaningful level, and yet we can recognize them as people because we can see the humanity that they possess. And to understand that humanity so intimately as to be able to imbue its characters with it is an achievement on Hibike's part which can hardly be undersold. What strikes me about the characters in Hibike Euphonium after all of this is that they're incredibly smart. Not that they're all particularly intelligent in an academic sense, but rather that they are perceptive and self-conscious in a way that anime characters very rarely are. There's of course the incredibly prevalent trope in rom-coms of some type of silly, dumb misunderstanding delaying things and drawing them out, creating conflicts that don't actually exist, one that Hibike itself even sees fit to parody. Think of all the scenes where a guy gets walked in on, and while the situation is completely innocent, it looks like there's something going on, and that'll either cue some slapstick or some drama depending upon that anime's focus being comedic or dramatic. These scenes almost always feel illogical, because while there are certainly instances of misunderstanding in real life where the reasonable explanation for things that would resolve the issue doesn't get to be made, They do not play out like this, with judgments being made instantly, with no doubts about their conclusions, and with no serious questioning whatsoever of what is actually going on. Then there are instances of characters hiding things very poorly, lying whose barefacedness is played up for laughs, but that still goes unchallenged and largely unsuspected by those being lied to. This approach isn't automatically indicative of a failure on the part of a series. There are comedies where the characters being idiots is the point, and examples of well-used dramatic irony. But as these instances of what is frankly just stupidity stack up, it becomes harder and harder to maintain an investment in these characters as believable people instead of just caricatures. Hibike, of course, has misunderstandings. In general, if you want a conflict where the various sides can come together once it's over and be on the same team, so to speak, as the Kitauji High School Band does, you can either have actual differences in philosophical outlook that get resolved through at least one of the sides shifting their stance, meaning that there is no longer that conflict, or that conflict must not be due to actual fundamental disagreements, but a flawed perception of the other side as disagreeing with you. Let's think about the conflicts in Hibike. We've got the big disagreement that the second years and third years had before the series started, one that was based upon fundamental differences as to what the band's goals should be, differences that neither side changed their stance on, and that as a result led to many members simply leaving. Coming together and reconciling those differences just wasn't possible. That conflict between Asuka and Nozomi, on the other hand, is based purely upon a misunderstanding. Asuka is against Nozomi rejoining because she believes there is a conflict between her and Mizore, and while that isn't entirely untrue, that conflict is actually one that was already proving to be detrimental to Mizore's playing, and one that needed to be resolved by her interacting and reaching closure with Nozomi, not being separated from her. Once that is revealed, Asuka can welcome Nozomi into the band with open arms. This conflict is emblematic of that difference from those in many other anime, though. This one isn't caused by some dramatic irony, where if only the characters had stepped into the room 3 seconds earlier they would have seen what actually went on, and had no reason to get upset. They are based upon the premise that Hibike's characters are reading their surroundings with critical eyes, attempting to uncover what exactly is going on just like we are. Indeed, we may very well have only figured out the reality of Mizore's hang-ups right as the rest of Hibike's characters did, and yet just as the likes of Kumiko and Asuka were, we the audience had been given information from which we could have pieced together what was actually going on. This agency on the part of its characters, this self-awareness Hibike's cast has of those around them, and their constant efforts to better understand what's going on, may even serve to confuse members of its audience. Those who don't recognize how unreliable these characters can be, and the dangers taking their conclusions to heart can hold. You've really got to be paying attention to pick up on all of their subtleties, those little moments where their masks drop. Writing for Wave Motion Canon, The Subtle Doctor picked up on a moment from the finale of Season 1 that I had completely missed. Interspersed with all of the shots of elated Kitauji students reacting to having won gold, Asuka is seen looking down to the floor with a sober expression, before a quick cut to her joining in on the celebration moves things right along. At the time, all Doc could do was speculate that this is something we'd learn more about as Season 2 rolled along. And finally, it seems we can understand why she might have apprehensions about advancing to a position where she would be interacting with her father for the first time in 15 years, even in the somewhat indirect position of competitor to judge. The implication it has for her relationships with both her father and her mother, her personal drive as a musician, her feelings of obligation towards the band that relies upon her as the rock of their foundation, and friends she's made along the way. This swirling mass of organizations, people, and emotions all affect Asuka's decision-making and how she presents herself at every turn. Every one of them play real perceptible roles in shaping her as a character, in meaningful ways, and as a result, until we learn this full story, until they've all been woven together to create the tapestry that is Asuka Tanaka, our understanding of her is incomplete. This richness, a blend of overlapping motivations, apprehensions, hang-ups, and aspirations that it is able to imbue characters like Asuka with, cements Hibike not as a masterpiece of anime, but as a masterpiece of fiction. What Hibike is also a master of is animation and filmmaking, though. Take everything I've said up until this point, all of the praise, all of that subtlety and nuance utilized so incredibly by Hibike, and let it be known that its visuals not only match the narrative and character writing in quality in those regards, but are the linchpin upon which the show's presentation of them rest. The Sakuga blog has been faithfully singing its praises week after week, and is definitely worth consulting for a more holistic look at what Hibike has been doing, but I'll attempt to restrain and focus my gushing here. When discussing Kyoto Animation, the starting point has got to be the character animation. I say that, but really you could pick from any number of starting points and be talking about the industry's gold standard. For me to have the confidence, or arrogance, you can pick, to deem Hibike's characters the most human in the medium, it isn't just that stellar writing that has to be present, but the astounding animation of that writing in order to convey it. Animation is acting, and just as world-class actors elevate the scripts of almost any work they're a part of, so too does the world-class animated acting in Hibike elevate it. And also, I'm sorry, but I've really got to go off on this tangent and mention how, let me consult my thesaurus because I'm running out of adjectives here, how breathtaking the vocal aspect of Hibike's acting is. After trying it out when they recorded the lines for the Hibike film, the staff at KyoAni deliberately asked for a more natural, less anime-style delivery from the voice actors, and it shows. Even though it had been months since the first season had finished airing, within seconds of Season 2's first episode, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about these voices, and it's certainly been for the better. Add to that little touches like the festival announcements being given high amounts of reverb because the festival's location is one that's surrounded by mountains, and of course the wonderfully realized instrumental noises from warm-ups to performances, all of which take the location of any given scene and what its acoustics would be into account, and you've got a truly immersive experience. The careful crafting of that naturalistic setting I mentioned Hibike's naturalistic characters being placed into. Well, so much for that restraint. Let's finally get to the animation though. And on the topic of Hibike's creation of its naturalistic world, what better place to start than that festival scene from the second season's first episode? Where a lot of productions that simply don't have KyoAni's time, resources, and talent just aren't able to imbue their settings with a real sense of life, this festival is practically flaunting its crowd scenes, with a constant stream of people coming and going while Kumiko and Reina are shopping around, and then proceeding to throw a few more at us, just because they can. The true pride and joy this series possesses, however, is its intimate and nuanced character animation. Animation which serves a crucial role in conveying character to us in a series where so many of its characters are so guarded with their true feelings. Talk about show don't tell. In a handful of seconds, the unsteady mental state of Asuka's mother is conveyed to us, through this fantastic sequence of her processing, reacting to, and restraining her response to Taki-sensei. Even if the show didn't already establish Reina's crush on Taki-sensei as well as it does, this incredibly endearing cut that manages to ride the line between abstraction and groundedness to perfection would have demonstrated how his presence always threatens to sweep her off her feet. And with both aspects conveying this as well as they do, we are able to experience those emotions right alongside her. What really tended to strike me were the smaller moments, though. While few studios could execute these high-impact scenes to the degree that KyoAni did, many of them could do a similar thing with enough proficiency to be plenty effective. Being as talent-laden as they are, the staff at Kyoto Animation can make those scenes that serve as emotional and developmental high points so stand out, and still have wonderfully animated moments during characters' downtimes. Scenes like Hazuki swinging from the handhold absent-mindedly is a little piece of characterization that is such a natural action for people to be performing in real life, and yet is so relatively rare for the often static realm of TV anime. Another such highlight was Kumiko kicking off her shoes as she sinks into her chair on the train ride home, performing the heavily relatable act of totally relaxing herself after a long, exhausting day, which gives us the best of both worlds, humanizing her and setting up her mindset for one of the highlight interactions of the series, one where that lowered guard this scene so brilliantly conveys is a key component. With more extensive and humanizing presentation of its characters through its animation than anything else on television, standout voice acting, and the creation of a cast with an unmatched level of agency and trueness to life, Hibike forced me to make considerations about people in the world around me that I had never had. In my own life, it has been far too easy to boil people down to simple motivations and mindsets. We've all got a little Asuka in us, learning one trait that is maybe a key to understanding someone, but that can't possibly make up the whole picture, and fueled by our cynicism jumping forward to draw conclusions about who exactly that person is and how they think, basing our attitudes towards them off of those conclusions. Hibike Euphonium creates a cast of characters that are so fleshed out, so nuanced, and so lifelike, that it forces us to recognize how three-dimensional the characters that surround us in the 3D world are, by giving so much humanity to them that we are made to realize just how little humanity we can often ascribe to our fellow humans. Hibike Euphonium crafted the most human characters in anime. I've put out a ton of videos this month, and the only reason I was able to do so was the knowledge that I had Mike editing this massive project for me. This level of output is something I can achieve thanks to the support of Goose, Chelsea Chester, Culver James Kamai, Chris Wagner, and all of the other patrons who have decided to support me. Thank you.